Associate Artistic Director here. And welcome, you guys. This is truly, truly one of our favorite weekends. And I love that you guys are here and that you're going to get to hear this amazing, amazing speech today. Rey Pamatmat is a dear friend of mine and a dear friend of this theater. He is a 3-time Humana Festival veteran. In 2011, he wrote Edith Can Shoot Things and Kill Them, and he has twice worked on the professional training company's Humana show, in 2011 with The End, and in 2007 with the Open Road anthology. You will notice that in 2011, that means he was working on 2 Humana plays in the same festival. That's an amazing writer. He's a huge champion of the professional training company, and he also wrote, and I'm going to read the title, Gratuitous Nudity and the Undisclosed Costs of Surveillance Rather Than Bad Broccoli. You don't memorize that title. For the professional training company's new play project last year. He is a tireless advocate for queer writers and artists of color, and is currently working on Safe, 3 queer plays, a cycle that follows the recent changes in queer America through a gay man of color's romantic and artistic life. He's the co-director of Mayi's Writers Lab. He got his BFA from NYU. He got his MFA from Yale. He is a Pisces. And he is a lover of Twin Peaks. It is my honor to introduce you to Rey Pamatmat.
Intro that mentions Twin Peaks. Those are people who know me. Hi everyone. Need a little coffee. I did want to, before I actually get into this speech, I did want to say, I know the March for Our Lives is today, and I'm sure there are some people who wish that they could be there. And so I just wanted to remind everyone that the purpose of direct action is that it's meant to have an effect. And if you can't be there for the action, you can be part of the effect. So it's like now would be the time to write or call your congressman, let them know that the march means something to you, and that, I mean, the effect of the march is to create sensible gun legislation. So go ahead, this is a good time to talk to your congressman when that's going on. You could also donate money to the Brady campaign, and you could note that it's because of the March for Our Lives. Any of these things are just as effective as marching. And since we cannot be marching, I encourage anybody who wishes they could be to do that. Okay. Actual speech, here we go. I do, of course, want to say that I love the Actors Theater of Louisville. They are the first people to have ever given me like an honest-to-God paying gig as a professional playwright. So I owe them so much. And I, of course, want to thank Les Waters, Kevin Moore, Jane Jones in the Education Department, the entire staff. At this point, I know so many people on the staff that I actually can't say everyone, or that would be the whole speech. And the professional training company, I love you guys. Even though I don't know this year's company, I still love you. And of course, all of you for coming to visit on College Days weekend. Thank you all for being here. We were going to have a lot of fun. But first, we'll do this like Keynote puffery thing. And here we go. All right. So when actors ask me to speak to you about your futures transitioning from school to the professional world, my first thought was, me? My transition to the professional world was a disaster. Like, the career path for someone like me literally does not exist. So the path I walked was filled with so much frustration and even, at times, sadness. But then they said I could see all of the 2018 Humana shows, and I was like, okay. I honestly didn't know where to begin with this speech. As a queer Filipino-American playwright from a broken home, who grew up middle class in one of my home state's most sparsely populated, economically devastated, drug-infested areas, my career in the American theater isn't just an anomaly, it's an impossibility. Even if the American theater isn't actively hostile towards me, it isn't always welcoming. Literally, no one like me gets produced. Literally, no one is at home saying, oh, I can't wait for the next play from the perspective of a queer Filipino-American from a broken home who grew up middle class in a sparsely overpopulated, economically devastated, drug-infested areas. No artistic director or literary manager or young actor starting an ensemble theater in a basement is saying that. Literally no one is saying that. In fact, it's not an exaggeration to say that I've walked through rooms filled with people who didn't care about or even hated everything that I stand for. And so that became my starting point for the speech. Because if someone like me can actually get somewhere in the American theater, then there must be something to learn from the path I took to do it, no matter how circuitous, unintentional, and unreproducible parts of it were. Because here I am, still loving what I do and eager to keep doing it day after day. Now, any normal person would start at the beginning, but as just established, very little about my career is normal, so I'm going to start on November 9th, 2016. Yes, I am starting with the election of Donald Trump. Some of your hearts just fell through the earth. Do we really have to talk about this now again? It gets worse, because really, I'm going to start with social media posts the morning after the election of Donald Trump. So if you want to roll your eyes, now's the time. Get it out of your system. Right now, I don't care if you're a Democrat, Republican, independent, or apolitical. If you were of age to vote, I don't care if you voted for him because you hated her, or because you're a neo-Nazi, or if you voted for her because you hated him, or because you're a social justice warrior, or if you abstained because you hate both of them, or because you don't vote. I don't care. Because here's the thing, however you voted or didn't, I'm sure we can all agree that a Trump presidency is a direct threat to my well-being. My parents were immigrants, one of whom only became a citizen in 2015 after 42 years of permanent residence, which was, in the end, very lucky because we're from a shithole country with lots of Muslims, and apparently in Michigan, even a white, permanent resident of 40 years who is a doctor with an American spouse can be detained indefinitely by ICE now. Google Lucas Niece when we're done here. Seriously, do it. So my parents were immigrants, but I grew up in a predominantly white area on a non-working middle American farm. I'm brown, I kiss boys, I'm in the artist class, that weird group that both delights and reviles both the 99% and the 1%, who bounces back and forth above and below the poverty line year after year. I protested the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the mass incarceration and multiple murders by law enforcement of black men, DOMA, marriage inequality, and income inequality. I marched on Washington for gay rights, blocked traffic with Occupy Wall Street and Black Lives Matter, and I've been arrested for blocking traffic while fighting for the right of grad students to unionize. I write queer narratives that decenter or ignore straightness. I write Asian American narratives that displace or ignore whiteness. And I have always, always been very honest about what I stand for. I don't hide these parts of who I am. Because, oops. And for all these reasons, I am more American than the person you picture when I say all American. Unlike that Aryan hayseed, I could only exist in America, a country birthed from immigrant dissidence and revolution. I'm an American, and President Trump is a direct threat to my life because he is a direct threat to everything that America makes possible. But when I saw the despair that covered my Facebook timeline after the election, I didn't have exactly the same incapacitating experience as many of my friends, particularly the straight ones. And so early on November 9th, 2016, at 7:52 a.m., I posted this. Good morning, America. So I've been quietly working on this cycle of plays lately. It's this big queer series of 3. One play about falling in love when the world says you're unlovable. One about making life decisions when the world says you don't deserve life. And one about wrestling with being accepting when the world says you yourself are unacceptable. Basically, they're about being human as the world dehumanizes you. I'm shocked that while working on these plays, I didn't see the results of last night's election coming. Many queers know the feeling so many of us are waking up with this morning. being faced with the reality that a person, community, or country that we believed would love us, perhaps unconditionally, doesn't even see us as human. That sometimes we don't even see ourselves this way, human beings as deserving of life's bounty as everyone else. The main point of these plays is to communicate that fighting for inclusion isn't enough, and that wanting to be included is, in fact, a fight for and from a position of weakness. We must also fight more radically to end exclusion. We must empower ourselves to take every goddamn thing we can so that no one has the power to decide who is human and who isn't. The point is that for some of us, this election is business as usual. But instead of our parents telling us we're disgusting and should just die, it's the United States of America. Sure, we've been punched in the gut, and it will take a bit to recover our footing. But I have to believe I've spent my whole life developing the tools to fight this hostility while retaining and celebrating my own humanity. And I believe that we've taken 10 steps forward in my lifetime, and this is only 1, maybe 2 steps back. And so for all those reeling from these results, I'm saying that I'm pretty sure we can hold each other up until we find our footing again. Find the queerest person you know, the women inside you and that surround you, take a breath, and we'll figure out what to do next. And you know, if you feel like it, you can do these fucking plays too. 1.5 years later, I stand by this Facebook post. I know how to survive and sometimes even thrive when the rest of the world literally wants to kill me, or at least huge parts of me. It's not pleasant, but it's possible. And that's where we are as artists in America today. That's the professional world you are entering. A world where the president can propose a budget that will kill the already threatened National Endowments of the Arts and Humanities and PBS. One where the tax law has been changed to specifically gut the middle class in our most socialist, wealth-producing states, 2 of which, New York and California, are where you have the most potential of getting paying work, where much of your ticket buying audience lives, and where your future agents, managers, producers, and publishers live. One where the new tax law has taken away the incentive for middle class people to give money to the arts and for the wealthy to give money to the arts by removing itemized deductions and doubling the estate tax exemption. In just 15 months, this administration has declared that it does not want the federal government to support the arts. It wants to disrupt the economic stability of the people who do, and it wants to cut off income streams to the institutions and support organizations that put up our work and sign our paychecks. To cut off income streams to places like the one you're sitting in right now, the Actors Theater of Louisville. This administration does not believe that you as artists deserve life or support. It barely believes that you are human. But you do, and you are. You deserve life. You are human. And by remembering that, you can keep making your art. So the question, of course, is, why do it? Why stay in your profession in a world that hates your profession? For a life, you have no choice. I cannot quit being a homosexual male. I cannot quit being a bicultural person of color. I can't even choose to be in a country that doesn't have homophobia encoded into its laws, mores, and social attitudes. That country doesn't exist. There's also no country that will fully embrace my ethnicity as theirs. I'm too American to be Filipino, and many Americans are too prejudiced to let go of my perpetual foreignness. I mean, I could maybe move to Hawaii. That's probably as close as I'm going to get, but what am I going to do in Hawaii? I really love Hawaii, though. But I could stop being political, though. I could stop my political activities in writing. I could stop being queer. I can't stop being homosexual, but I could stop being queer. And I could stop being an artist. No more theater. I could go back to school, hone my secret ability collected from a long, strange string of theater survival jobs working with databases, and start pulling in 6 figures, organizing and designing data systems for Google, or Facebook, or hell, even Cambridge Analytica. And so could you. You don't have to do what you're doing. And then I wouldn't have to feel that tremendous guilt that many of your other teachers and mentors undoubtedly feel when they encourage you in this profession. In fact, I think you should quit. If you are 20 whatever and you're thinking about quitting, do it. Because if you're already thinking it now, you're going to quit soon. As hard as your artistic career may have been up to this point, and as a guy who did 4 years of conservatory and 3 years at a graduate arts professional school, I know how hard it can be. As hard as it's been, this is as easy as being an artist will ever be. And if this administration has its way, it's about to get much worse. So if you're already thinking about quitting, I mean it, quit. I am not being cute. This is not reverse psychology or tough love. This is honesty and actual love, the general, supportive, concerned about your welfare kind of love. Quit. If you can. I actively try to quit the theater about every 8 or 9 years. Real, not being cute. But I find that of all of the things I can't quit are the things that keep bringing me back to it. I cannot quit being a homosexual male. I cannot quit being a bicultural person of color. And so I cannot stop talking about it. I cannot stop writing about it. I cannot stop telling people that I shouldn't have to stop being queer or brown to be treated as though I am endowed with certain unalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And when I successfully communicate that I am real and have a right to exist to an audience, my peers, a classroom, a reader, a listener, I feel peace. That imaginary loving country I cannot live in with laws based on liberation for queers and empowerment for people between cultures becomes less necessary because I have peace without it. And so as the world becomes more hostile to us all as artists, you must find that thing in making art that brings you as much peace as reifying my deeper self does for me. Not the thing about theater that makes you feel ecstatic and high, not the thing you would suffer and die for like artists do in all those stupid movies that romanticize us. Find the thing or idea or core value in your artistic practice that brings you peace. Because when the show is a hit, that peace is what will carry you through self-doubt and self-sabotage. And when the show is a failure, that peace will hold off self-destruction. And when there is no show at all, which is most of the time, that peace is what will remind you that it doesn't matter. Okay, so pretend that I've successfully scared 70% of you off from this profession. Or at least pretend I planted the seed for 70% so that you realize a year or two from now, you don't have that thing which brings you peace as an artist, but you do have that thing that brings you peace as an educator, or a packaging designer, or a doctor without borders, or a nanny. I'm really happy for that 70% of you. Please continue to support the arts, especially if you can donate, especially because of this culture-killing tax law. For that other 30% of you, here's the part where I say, now you know it brings you peace with your work, and that's the hardest part, right? Hell no, have you been listening to me? You are surrounded by a world that could care less whether you stay connected to that peace, and which in fact is structured to pull you away from it. All I said so far was figure out what it is. Now comes the actual hard thing, fighting to stay in touch with it. Because you will be fought. So if that peace is real, but it's not worth fighting for, then join the other 70%. Go get rich coding a revolutionary app in Objective-C that appeals to millennials as profitable and has a social justice component. And keep the supporting the arts, especially now, especially because of this tax law. For the, let's say, 20% of you that are left now, let's talk about some times when I was made to fight, and why I think it's worth it to put yourself in the line of fire. Sure, success, happiness, and self-preservation seem more achievable if you remove yourself from a hostile environment. But when the hostility is as strong as it is now, we can't afford to do that if we want to remain artists. We don't, for example, defeat racism and homophobia by hiding who we are, by becoming self-segregating brown queer people or anti-racist, anti-homophobic people in a bubble. We don't show people there's another, better, funner way by hiding it from them or by telling them we deserve its benefits and they don't. And so now's the part in the speech where I tell you all of the terrible things that happened to me. Blah, blah, blah. It may or may not surprise you, depending on your own mixed up mashup of political identities, that a lot of the terrible things that forged the person before you now happened while I was in school. In the place where I was supposed to be enlightened, I often found deep, deep ignorance. Where I was supposed to cultivate confidence, bravery, and a clear artistic voice, I instead found insecure people spreading fear, crippling fear. But before I get into all that garbage, I want to tell you that I ultimately love my undergraduate and graduate experience. That's where this is heading. So stick with me through the slog, and I promise you'll see why. But first, holy crap, school sucked! Okay, I studied acting in undergrad, not writing, as many nascent playwrights do. Undergrad is where I learned that the Bharata-Muni's Natyashastra exists, and that it's an ancient South Asian theater manual documenting the longest continuous theatrical tradition in the world, and that it predates Aristotle's Poetics by more than 100 years. But undergrad is also where a movement teacher told me that slumped shoulders were caused by Asian people's genetic predisposition towards subservience and low self-esteem. It's where I learned from a fellow queer Michigander, Ms. Holly Hughes, that if no one will write parts for me, that I could write them for myself. But it's also where teachers refuse to cast me in lead roles because an Asian American actor will never play leads in real life, where I was told I would never get real work at all if I didn't figure out how to properly closet myself. Undergrad is where I started writing the queer solo performance poems that eventually became my plays, where my first play ever premiered a short 9 months after I wrote it, a play about my discomfort dating a white guy and my fury after he dumped me. Undergrad is where I learned from mounting that play that the things other people believed were limiting me, my ethnicity, my queerness, my open lack of shame about both, were actually the things that liberated me and made my artistic life possible. I know that many of these teachers were well-intentioned, however ignorant or downright bigoted their lessons were. They thought they were being as honest and realistic as I hope I'm being here. But to all those educators and future educators listening right now, I implore you to consider whether it's best to subject your students to bigoted systems, possibly for the first time in their lives, or to teach them about bigoted systems and how to handle them. The former shows them and their peers witnessing their treatment how to perpetuate bigotry when they're leaders in the field themselves, while the latter gives them and their peers strategies for navigating and maybe even eliminating those challenges. Do you want to limit your students or liberate them? Which brings me to grad school. Look, I went to a prestigious institution, but I'm not going to name check for them you. You've got the Google, you've also got Meredith's introduction. If you want to know where I went. But the thing, I'm not name checking them because my experiences at this particular school are not rare or unique. It is not the only grad program clumsily fumbling into the present, like Katy Perry showing her profound love and appreciation of Japanese culture by wearing a Chinese costume. Some people say the very fact that I was admitted to grad school is a step in the right direction, and I don't necessarily disagree. But the idea that I should just be happy to be at a traditionally white, traditionally straight, fancy pants institution and gratefully receive their instruction without question has disturbing undertones of straight white male supremacy. I wasn't the heathen being brought to Jesus, or the tribesman being taught civilized democracy. I was a fully formed 23-year-old human being with worthwhile experiences to share in a community committed to learning. In grad school, however, my instructors somehow believed that they could just admit a queer, politically active Filipino-American playwright and not reassess any of their pedagogy tailored to straight white students. When my first year play was being presented, not only did actors refuse to accept casting assignments in it because they feared the gay sexual situations in the script, these actors also took to calling me the porno playwright around campus, despite the fact that the situations upsetting them were romantic and included only optional nudity. Did the school sit the actors down for a conversation on professional behavior and homophobia? Did they facilitate a conversation between these actors and me about professional responsibilities and expectations and limits in an educational environment? Did they hire actors from outside the school to fulfill their promise of the first year workshop they pledged to me? No. They told me I either had to do another play, not do a play at all, or I had to personally recruit volunteer actors among the student body. In other words, they formalized the homophobic hysteria of these other students and left me to fend for myself. Were they trying to limit me or liberate me? This trauma was repeated my second year, when a role had to be recast 3 times, again because homophobia was accepted as an institutional value that allowed actors to reject assignments. But I also had the added pleasure of having a white woman play a lead role for a Chinese American actor in my second year show. This happened even though there were 3 Asian American actresses attending our school, two of whom lobbied for the part. When I protested that yellowface was a racist casting practice, I was told that I, a playwright of color, by a white administrator, could not expect to write racially specific characters during my career at this school. It was even implied that my inability to write and cast colorblind was due to my retrograde ideas of race. Meanwhile, 2 of the Asian American actresses remained uncast during the run of my play, and the 3rd was cast in a play supporting white leads where she spoke 3 lines. Limiting or liberating? And that was just the stuff directly affecting me. At this school, we were taught that the gibberish Dada artist uttered was inspired by primitive African languages, not that it was cultural appropriation based on the plundering and misunderstanding of an entire continent. The professional theater linked to this school had an entire season where no actors of color appeared on stage, except for one African-American woman playing a character called the Monster. There was even a semester where every student of color in every program in the school was on probation, and no one thought that was even a little bit weird. Yet when I very openly, very publicly spoke out, if I'm not quiet, against these ridiculous incidents to inspire dialogue, and I hoped change, I was privately told I should perhaps take a break from school or even leave the program altogether. Why am I telling you this? Now is when I remind you that in retrospect, I am grateful for my undergrad and grad school experiences. And I'm not just saying this because they taught me the hard way to deal with several issues I continue to encounter in the professional world. Would I have preferred a faculty that knew the difference between teaching racism and homophobia and being racist and homophobic? Sure. Would I have preferred sometimes to just hide myself from those situations altogether? I mean, yes. But at that point in my career, the best choice for me to succeed was by entering, however unwittingly, that unwelcoming, hostile world. Just like you are about to do as artists in the Trump administration. Just as I, with reservations, encourage you to do, if you know you can keep your peace facing such hostility. Because lately, it seems that in our friend groups, neighborhoods, workplaces, and even social media, we've started only hanging out with people who are like us or who think the way we do. And if we're not with those people, we actually fear for our lives and fret about the erasure of our existence. This tribal attitude is, by definition, a conservative stance, but it is one that has begun to infect the liberal mind, which is nuts. The very definition of liberal is willing to respect or accept behavior or opinions different from one's own, open to new ideas. How is living in a bubble open? This is a significant reason that liberals are losing more and more influence in the national conversation. Because if the conservatives are acting conservative and the liberals are acting conservative, then our country just becomes all conservative. This might sound like I'm telling you to put yourself out into that world like some sacrificial lamb ready to be destroyed. I want to be clear that I am absolutely not saying that. I'm not trying to inspire martyrs or create masochists. Do not put yourself in situations where you could be physically harmed or physically or mentally abused. If the environments you find yourself in make it impossible to stay in touch with the peace I talked about before, then step back, recharge, and ensure that you can keep it in sight. But somehow, I managed to get through all of that terrible stuff on my path with my peace in sight to this profession and not come out battered and bruised, right? I mean, do I look battered? No. So why? Because when I was in school first year, a few actors did volunteer to do my plays, even the gay parts, even the nudity. And they embarrassed and inspired their colleagues with the beauty and commitment of their performances. On more than one occasion, playwrights would invade my apartment bearing ice cream at the end of really bad days. And they would sit with me through waffle brunches and Buffy the Vampire Slayer marathons. I met so many collaborators at school and through school with whom I made amazing plays, and with whom I'm still making amazing plays. Moreover, many of those peers have gone into the field pursuing progressive agendas in all areas of theater, film, and television. We work together to seek out and uplift other artists with similar values, filling our profession with more and more like-minded playwrights and theater makers. Some of these colleagues even tell people that our time in school was formative to their current conceptions of how to revise representations of race, ethnicity, gender, and sexuality. I look back on these times with fondness, not because I'm a martyr, not because success is the best revenge, not because I've turned my experiences into some weirdo, self-aggrandizing hero narrative. I look back on these times with fondness because I went into a place where I was embattled, and I walked through it and out of it, making friends. And those friends built a community. And that community is getting us closer, step by step, to that imaginary country of liberation and joy where I can stay in touch with the peace my art brings me every day. That community turned this impossibility into a career. That will not happen if we stay hidden away in our little bubbles. Those communities will not form or grow if we don't engage with people who aren't like us, people with whom we disagree, people who might hate us. If we don't stand in front of them and show them how kick-ass we are. As you make the transition into this profession, I ask you to step into this world that is hostile to artists and make friends, build community, and transform this country. This is the future path I want for you. There are maybe 10% of you left who are still confident you can do this. And one day, when one of you is behind this podium, giving this speech, I hope you are able to just open wide your arms and welcome the next generation to an industry supported by the American people that supports and represents the American people, all of the American people, in return. Even if we have taken 1 or 2 steps back, let's take 10 more steps forward, and let's do it together. I am enormously grateful that we shared this time together. If I may, I would like to leave you with a blessing, which of course you are free to accept or not. May you have peace for yourselves, may you bring peace to others, and may you bring peace to the universe. Thank you.
raise your hand. They'll just take turns getting around to you. It's just a few minutes. Anybody? Right there in front. Katie? Well, just so that everybody can hear.
I think we're on. Hi there. This isn't exactly a question for you, but something that I hope will bring peace to other people.
Right.
You were mentioning the tax law and the National Endowment for the Arts. I actually was in DC last week advocating for the arts, and which is something you all can do. I encourage you to. Americans for the Arts just like sends out fantastic emails aside from that. I wanted to inspire some peace and hope that the National Endowment for the Arts, even though the Trump administration has said, we're going to cut it 2 years in a row, all of our legislators have said, no, we're not. And in fact, this year, recently this week, we actually got a $3 million increase in funding for 2018. And his administration does not support us as artists. It doesn't mean that the entire government and the entire country doesn't. So there is hope and peace for you that I find very relaxing. So sorry that I didn't ask you a question.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for your speech.
Oh, thank you for attending.
I got a little friendship going now, right? I teach at a community college in Western Massachusetts. I understand you spent some time in Northampton.
I did.
Yes.
I love Northampton.
Well, that's where I live, and I teach in Springfield.
Oh, cool. Okay.
It's a technical community college, so we're not teaching future BFA students, but we try to pass along the love of theater. And occasionally I run up against, we have a very conservative student body, and I recently ran up against a student where I gave him a role and the character was gay. He said, I'm not going to do it. And I said, why? And he said, this is against my religious beliefs. What do you do?
I actually do think that forcing that student to read that role is just going to upset them more. But I do think it's worth having a conversation, asking that student to have a conversation with you publicly, like in front of the class, about how they feel and why they feel, and what it is that upsets them about it. Like everything, I don't think that, that's the thing, I don't necessarily think that we have to change people to become like us in that sense, to have all of the same views that we have, so much as we just have to open them up to the idea that we can all have differing views and not squish each other down. And and so like just having that conversation with that student, asking the students who agree with them and who don't, and who would be willing to read the role, is the way to move the class along.
Hi, thank you so much. So as we move forward into the 21st century, there are huge strides being made for queer representation in the mainstream media. We see that more and more every year, but there's still huge steps that need to be taken. So how do you as a queer artist, and how do we move forward to keep making those changes when people think that there's been enough when there really hasn't been?
Well, I mean, I think, it's, I feel like a lot of people they feel exhausted. They're like, oh, now we have to do this. Oh, we got this far, now we have to go further. Oh, we got this far, now we have to go further even more. And I think like a big part of it is getting everyone to understand that the world keeps changing, and that it's the journey, not the destination, right? We are constantly in a place of revision. The composition of the country is constantly changing. The attitudes within the country are constantly changing. It's about letting people know that we're not just trying to get to some threshold. We're just continuously trying to expand our understanding of what America is and what it has the potential to be, right? And then in terms of queer representation, I think the easiest way to get people to understand that it's not enough is to keep creating different types of queer representation. Like there is no, like I said, nobody, like I would love to hear about other queer Filipino playwrights that are writing roles that are for queer Filipino characters. You know what I mean? Like there's always something else to do, and there's always a fun way to do it.
Hello. Oh, that's loud. So I just want to say first, as a fellow queer playwright of color, thank you. This meant a lot. And also, what makes you keep going? Because you said you want to quit every 8 or 9 years. So what makes you come back?
You know, I really do mean that I can't stop. That I actually consciously try to stop and find that writing is a bit of a compulsion for me, and so it's easier to keep writing than it is to stop, is usually what it comes to. And a lot of times it's the best way I found to be able to share myself and my ideas with people. So as when I stop writing and something frustrates me or I start to have a question about something, the best way I can work out the answer to that question is to start writing something down, and then before I know it, I have a play. So So it is what I said. I find peace by being able to continue to make work, and so I continue to make work.
Hi, we're this way. What's up?
Hi.
Hi. Sorry, I didn't feel like standing.
That's cool.
Well, first off, thank you for your keynote. Secondly, I was just so excited sitting in the seat this whole time because I was like, oh my God, he also comes from immigrant families. And he's just so, I don't want to say so Asian, but he's so Asian, he's so proud, he's so happy, and I just want to be the same way. But this is a personal question, so obviously you don't have to answer it. But coming from an immigrant family, I know that my parents definitely didn't want me to pursue theater at all. They wanted me to be a doctor, a lawyer, this, that, and the other thing. How were you able to overcome that and were able to make a career out of it, especially because family is so important,
Yeah, my family was not, the thing is my family was not unsupportive. I was meant to become either a doctor or engineer. My family is only doctors and engineers and nurses. So, but my parents, they were part of that kind of family. Their generation was the first to go to college. So they were all forced to become doctors, nurses, engineers. And so me and my sisters, we were actually kind of lucky. Both of our parents agreed that they would encourage us to do those things, but really let us do whatever we want. So so I write plays. My little sister did become a speech pathologist, and my oldest sister is a chef. So we took very different paths. But they did, but like I said, they were encouraging me towards another direction, so they didn't really support me until I got into the fancy pants grad school. So I would recommend, if you have those parents, go somewhere fancy pants that they feel like they can brag about.
Hi, my question, I don't know if there's an answer or just some advice, but how do you walk the line between tokenization and representation, especially within a microcosm where, for instance, how many actors of color or queer actors there are, and you don't want to tokenize them, but also you would like to represent these demographics?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge, at least in terms of a playwright and in terms of production with that, is that the more successful you become, the more of a token you become. I have definitely noticed that as my plays have been done at larger and larger institutions, the audience changes so much, and the need for what the play communicates is so much, because when an audience is full of people like me, I don't necessarily have to package ethnicity or sexuality or anything like that for that audience. They just kind of get it. And then when the audience is less and less like me, then I actually have to, I have to change what the script is. But in doing that, this is getting a little crazy queer theory, so just stick with me. In doing that, you end up packaging, you end up tokenizing parts of your identity for other people. You turn them into objects for them to understand instead of merely letting those objects exist, right? So I have I do have, like I said, I do tend to not care. I do tend to just write plays. Even if we can talk about Edith for a second. There are times when Edith has been reviewed where reviewers will say, I don't understand why these characters are Filipino and why they're not showing more of their culture to me. And and like you guys there. Not to be too like, I don't write autobiography, but the characters in Edith grew up how I grew up. I grew up on a farm in the middle of middle America. They are as Filipino as I am. And so, the idea that you can only show people of color on stage when you package them for people who are not people of color is actually a way for white supremacy to exercise power over representation on stage, right? So I usually just don't do it. And one thing that people will always tell you as a playwright you should never ever do, I actually do respond to critics specifically when the review says something that is either ignorant or downright bigoted about the way that I'm doing something and not about whether or not they enjoyed the show. And I could talk about this forever, you guys. And when I have gone to those larger theaters, I do actually, this is the thing, when you do have to kind of be an activist as well as an artist. I work with the marketing departments and a lot of the audience outreach people to try to make sure that there are people coming who are like me, who know that this space that is not traditionally welcoming to them is, at least in the moments that I'm there, welcoming to them. So I try to get them to have events or parties, or or even just like I give free tickets to gay teenagers like kind of everywhere I go. Just like give them free tickets. They can't afford to be here, and some of them are hiding the fact that they're coming. So yeah, I think it's all that stuff.
Thank you so much for such a terrific speech. I'm among the oldest in this house, I think. I've been directing for some 60 years, and I am liberal through and through, but I have always, for a number of years, had problems with some of the tactics of the progressive movements, feminist, gay, black, whatever, that colorblind casting perhaps, which sometimes is really a politically self-righteous slap in the face of the audience. And when I saw your title of your play about, using the word hate twice in there, I thought, well, when I saw Edith here a few years ago, I loved it. It was one of the best things I've ever seen here. And I have been trying to persuade the theater company that I most commonly work with to produce Edith ever since then.
Yeah.
But it's too difficult to cast in this. And I saw your title of your speech, and I thought, this guy, does he embrace hatred, as so many of these little political bubbles seem to do? Either, when I hear you speak, this will cure me of wanting to be Edith, or perhaps not. And you have overwhelmingly made me resolve to go and persuade my company. And I have rarely heard such wisdom from someone so young. Thank you.
Terror on my face. What do I have to live up to from this point forward? Okay, sorry.
This is our last question.
Hi. Thank you again. I'm here. Thank you again for your speech. It was wonderful. Just a quick question. What are you working on now? What's coming up for you?
Well, I did recently finish that cycle of plays. I have, I've kind of taken this strange turn, and I am actually trying to be more directly political in what I write. So I'm working on a play right now but that's the thing. Like, I'm so bizarre that I try to be more directly political, and suddenly the play has like a haunted tree and a tree troll in it. So I'm working on a play about white supremacy with a haunted tree. And so that's what I'm doing. Yeah, I think that's